is my last video. It all has to come to this. Tomorrow is the day of retribution. The day in which I will have my revenge against humanity. Against all of you.
911, what's the address of your emergency?
I'm at Ivy Deli. Your guy thinks somebody else is on the line.
Okay.
I don't know what just happened.
Okay. Were you injured? Were you injured? Okay, where are you?
Somebody else is. We're at Ivy Deli in Isla Vista.
Okay, you're at Ivy Deli and somebody shot?
Yeah.
Okay.
Elliot Rodger was a 22-year-old student living in Isla Vista, California, who felt increasingly alienated and rejected by his peers. Born into a life of relative privilege as the son of a Hollywood filmmaker, he struggled with severe social anxiety and a deep-seated inability to form romantic connections. Over several years, his frustration curdled into a toxic ideology known as incel, involuntary celibate philosophy. He began documenting his grievances in a sprawling 137-page manifesto titled My Twisted World, where he detailed his hatred for women who ignored him and the men they chose instead. He viewed his lack of a sex life as a personal injustice perpetrated by society. To Elliot, the world was a hierarchy where he was unfairly placed at the bottom, and he began to plan what he called a day of retribution. He spent thousands of dollars on 3 semi-automatic handguns and hundreds of rounds of ammunition, practicing at local shooting ranges. His preparation was not just tactical, but theatrical. He intended to film a final video to explain his motives, ensuring his revenge against humanity would be immortalized and understood on his own dark terms. On May 23, 2014, Elliot Rodger sat in his black BMW 3 Series and uploaded a chilling video to YouTube titled Elliot Rodger's Retribution. Sitting behind the steering wheel, he spoke directly into the camera with a smug, eerie calmness, promising to punish the popular kids and slaughter every girl he found in a local sorority house. He laughed as he described the carnage he was about to unleash, viewing himself as a godlike figure, finally taking control of his destiny. Shortly after the video went live, he began the first phase of his attack, inside his own apartment. Using a hunting knife, he brutally murdered his 2 roommates and a visiting friend, stabbing them dozens of times. He then sat down at his computer and emailed his manifesto to several people, including his parents and his therapist, ensuring his written legacy was safe before he stepped out the door. With his handguns loaded and his car transformed into a mobile weapon, he drove toward the center of Isla Vista, ready to turn his digital threats into a physical massacre.
Isla Vista. Every time I drive through this place, I am overcome.
The rampage moved to the streets at approximately 9:30 p.m. Elliot drove to the Alpha Phi sorority house, the primary target mentioned in his video, and began pounding on the front door. When no one answered, he turned his rage toward 3 young women walking nearby, opening fire and killing 2 of them instantly. He then climbed back into his BMW and sped through the town, firing randomly at pedestrians from his driver's side window. He targeted a local deli, killing a young man inside, and continued driving down the crowded sidewalk, hitting several cyclists and skateboarders with his car. The small college town erupted into a scene of chaotic terror as students scrambled for cover, unsure where the shots were coming from. Elliot drove with one hand and fired with the other, his face a mask of cold determination. He had finally achieved the power he felt he had been denied his whole life, transforming the peaceful Friday night into a war zone where he held the ultimate authority over life and death. Police officers in Isla Vista responded within minutes, engaging in a high-speed gun battle with Elliot as he sped through the narrow streets. During the exchange, a bullet struck Elliot's vehicle, and a deputy managed to hit him in the hip, but he refused to stop. He continued his erratic driving, striking more pedestrians and crashing into parked cars while maintaining a constant stream of fire toward the chasing patrol units. The pursuit ended abruptly when his BMW clipped a cyclist and slammed into a parked vehicle, bringing the mangled car to a final halt. As officers approached the smoking wreckage with weapons drawn, they heard a single muffled gunshot from inside the cabin. When they reached the driver's side window, they found Elliot Rodger dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. Beside him on the passenger seat were his remaining handguns and hundreds of rounds of unused ammunition. The day of retribution had ended, leaving 6 innocent people dead and 14 others wounded in the wake of his senseless fury. The aftermath of the Isla Vista killings sent shockwaves through the world, sparking a massive debate about mental health, gun control, and the rise of misogynistic online subcultures. Elliot Rodger's manifesto and videos were analyzed by the FBI and sociologists to understand how a young man could become so radicalized by his own loneliness. While the public mourned the victims, 6 bright university students with promising futures, a disturbing trend emerged online. Within certain dark corners of the internet, Elliot was hailed as a saint or a hero by others who shared his incel views, creating a dangerous precedent for copycat attacks. His family expressed profound grief and shame, struggling to reconcile the son they knew with the monster who had committed such atrocities. The case forced social media platforms to rethink how they handle extremist content and spurred the creation of new laws regarding red flag gun seizures. Elliot Rodger's name became a permanent stain on the history of California, a haunting reminder of the devastating intersection between toxic entitlement, digital radicalization, and the easy accessibility of firearms.
You have given me license, through your example, to do what I need to do. When I do this, that levels the playing field in my favor. So now we've got a lopsided playing field. Because when I come back at you, I'm going to destroy your side of the playing field. I'm going to destroy you.
And on this day, 15 years ago, bizarre and frightening events played out in Granby. A man named Marianne Bachmeier terrorized the mountain town with a bulldozer he had retrofitted with thick armor. Bachmeier had a running feud with the town over a zone.
Marianne Bachmeier was a skilled welder and muffler shop owner who moved to Granby, Colorado, seeking a quiet life and a successful business. For years, he operated his shop with a reputation for precision, but his peace was shattered by a zoning dispute that felt like a personal attack. The town council approved the construction of a massive concrete plant on the land surrounding his property, effectively cutting off the only access road to his shop. Marianne attempted to fight the decision through every legal channel available, spending thousands on lawsuits and attending countless town meetings to plead his case. He even purchased a bulldozer to build an alternative road, but the city denied his permits and fined him for various code violations, including a lack of a proper septic tank. To Marianne, these were not just bureaucratic hurdles. They were the tools of a corrupt local government trying to drive him out of town. He felt targeted by the wealthy elite of Granby, believing they were conspiring to steal his livelihood. As his legal options evaporated and his frustration turned into a cold, hardening resentment, Marianne began to view his situation as a holy war against injustice, setting the stage for a transformation that no one saw coming. For over a year and a half, Marianne Bachmeier withdrew from the public eye, spending his nights in a locked shed behind his muffler shop. Neighbors heard the sounds of heavy machinery and welding, but they assumed he was simply working on a project to sell his business. In reality, Marianne was secretly engineering a weapon of unprecedented destruction. He took his Komatsu D-155A bulldozer and began encasing it in a homemade shell of composite armor. He used steel plates sandwiched with layers of concrete, creating a skin that was over a foot thick in some places. He knew that the police would attempt to stop him with gunfire, so he installed external cameras protected by 3-inch bulletproof glass linked to monitors inside the air-conditioned cabin. He even included air jets to blow dust off the camera lenses to ensure he never lost his sight. Inside this steel tomb, Marvin recorded hours of audio tapes explaining his motives and claiming that God had blessed him with the skills to build this killdozer. He believed he was an instrument of divine retribution, meticulously checking every bolt and weld. He sealed himself inside the machine, using a homemade crane to lower the final armor plate, knowing he would never walk out alive. On the afternoon of June 4th, 2004, the silence of Granby was shattered as the armored behemoth smashed through the walls of Marvin's shed. The killdozer lurched toward its first target, the concrete plant that had sparked the feud. Marvin moved with terrifying purpose, the massive blade of the bulldozer easily toppling the plant's buildings like they were made of cardboard. Local police arrived within minutes, but they were met with a chilling realization. Their service weapons were useless. Handgun rounds and shotgun slugs bounced harmlessly off the steel and concrete hide of the machine. Even when an officer managed to drop a flashbang grenade down the exhaust pipe, the killdozer kept moving. Marvin navigated the streets with robotic precision, steering the massive machine toward the homes and businesses of the town officials who had crossed him. He targeted the town hall, the local newspaper office, and the home of the former mayor. Panic gripped the town as citizens fled the path of the slow-moving but unstoppable force. The air was filled with the sound of grinding metal, collapsing timber, and the helpless sirens of police cars that could do nothing but watch. Marvin was no longer a man. He was an invincible force of vengeance. As the rampage continued into its second hour, the governor of Colorado considered calling in the National Guard to use an Apache helicopter or an anti-tank missile to stop the destruction. The local sheriff tried to jump onto the moving machine to find a weakness, but there was no way to penetrate the hull. Marvin had effectively created a tank that outmatched the local law enforcement's entire arsenal. However, the machine's greatest strength eventually became its downfall. After demolishing a hardware store owned by another rival, the bulldozer's undercarriage became trapped in a basement. The radiator had been damaged by the intense heat and debris, and the engine began to fail. Smoke poured from the machine as it groaned to a halt. For the first time in hours, the town went silent. SWAT teams surrounded the killdozer, using thermal imaging and specialized tools to try and find a way inside. They spent hours attempting to cut through the layers of steel and concrete with torches and explosives, but the armor held firm. Inside the dark, sweltering cabin, Marvin knew his mission was complete. He had leveled 13 buildings and caused over $7 million in damage. Before the police could reach him, he used a handgun to end his life, choosing his own exit. The following morning, the world woke up to the shocking images of Granby in ruins and the bizarre steel fortress at the center of it. It took workers over 12 hours of intense cutting to finally open the hatch and recover Marvin Heemeier's body. In the aftermath, the town was left to pick up the pieces of a fractured community. To the residents of Granby, Marvin was a domestic terrorist who had endangered innocent lives and destroyed the heart of their town. They pointed out that he had targeted a library and a building where children were present, narrowly avoiding a mass casualty event. However, on the internet, a different narrative began to take root. Many saw Marvin as a folk hero, a last-of-the-line individual who stood up against a bullying government and a corrupt system. They viewed the killdozer as a symbol of the ultimate protest against bureaucracy. The machine itself was eventually dismantled and its pieces scattered in various hidden locations to prevent it from becoming a shrine for extremists. Marvin Heemeier's story remains a haunting case study in how a long-running civil dispute can escalate into a mechanical nightmare, leaving behind a legacy that is as armored and impenetrable as the machine he built.
Stay sharp and stay safe. Subscribe now for more chilling true crime deep dives.
Guten Abend, meine Damen und Herren. Das Lübecker Schwurgericht hat heute die 32-jährige Marianne Bachmeier wegen Totschlags zu 6 Jahren Haft.
Marianne Bachmeier was a single mother living in West Germany, 1980, running a small cafe and devoted to her 7-year-old daughter, Anna. On May 5th, Anna had a disagreement with her mother and decided to skip school, an innocent act of rebellion that led her straight into the path of a predator. Klaus Grabowski, a 35-year-old neighbor and a convicted sex offender who had been chemically castrated, lured the young girl into his home. For several hours, Anna was held captive and subjected to horrific abuse. To hide his crime, Grabowski strangled the child with a pair of tights and packed her small body into a cardboard box, which he later abandoned on a canal bank. When Anna didn't return home, Marianne's life dissolved into a frantic search that ended in the ultimate nightmare. The police quickly linked Grabowski to the disappearance due to his criminal history. Upon his arrest, he confessed to the killing, but claimed he did it because the child had tried to blackmail him, a claim that deeply insulted Anna's memory. As Marianne sat in the police station, the realization that her daughter was gone forever began to forge a cold, silent resolve within her heart. Marianne Bachmeier spent the months leading up to the trial in a state of hollow grief, but behind her mourning eyes, a plan was taking shape. She did not trust that the legal system would adequately punish a man who had already been given a second chance and wasted it. She began practicing her aim, acquiring a Beretta .22 caliber pistol and learning how to conceal it within her clothing and handbag. She attended the preliminary hearings, sitting quietly in the gallery, watching the back of Grabowski's head as he spoke with his lawyers. She listened to the defense team attempt to paint the killer as a victim of his own hormonal imbalances and psychological trauma. Every word of justification from the witness stand served as a hammer blow to Marianne's patience. She stopped crying in public, replaced by a stoic mask that the media mistook for exhaustion. In reality, she was waiting for the right moment, the moment when she would be close enough to ensure he never walked free again. She kept the weapon clean and loaded, carrying the weight of her daughter's justice in her purse every time she entered the courthouse.
Marianne Bachmeier arrived at the Lübeck District Court on March 6, 1981, the third day of the trial. She took her usual seat in the gallery, wearing a quiet expression that betrayed nothing of the heavy metal tucked inside her jacket. As the proceedings began, Grabowski sat just a few meters away, slumped in his chair with a demeanor that Marianne found unrepentant. During a lull in the testimony, Marianne stood up with deliberate calmness. She reached into her pocket, gripped the Beretta, and leveled it at Grabowski's back. Before anyone in the crowded room could react, she pulled the trigger. 6 shots rang out in rapid succession, the sharp cracks echoing against the high ceilings of the courtroom. Grabowski lurched forward and collapsed onto the floor, struck multiple times in the back and shoulder. The room erupted into chaos. Lawyers dove under tables, and spectators screamed in terror. Marianne did not move. She did not try to escape or fire at anyone else. She stood over the fallen man, her arm outstretched until the gun was empty. She then lowered her hand and waited for the guards to reach her, her face a portrait of grim satisfaction.
Marianne Bachmeier was immediately taken into custody, but as news of the shooting spread, she became an overnight sensation across Germany and the world. The image of the grieving mother turned avenging angel sparked a fierce national debate about the failures of the justice system and the rights of a victim's family. While the state viewed her as a cold-blooded vigilante who had undermined the rule of law, the public saw her as a hero who had done what the courts were too weak to do. Thousands of letters of support arrived at her jail cell, many containing money for her legal defense. Protests formed outside the prison, with people carrying signs that read, "We are Marianne." The media scrutinized every detail of her life, from her troubled past to her business as a cafe owner. In interviews, Marianne remained unapologetic, stating that she did it for Anna and that she wanted to kill him to prevent him from lying about her daughter any longer.
The prosecution argued that the act was premeditated murder, while her defense claimed it was an act of temporary insanity fueled by unbearable grief. Marianne Bachmeier faced her own judgment in the very courthouse where she had taken Grabowski's life. In 1983, the court delivered its verdict, convicting her of manslaughter and unlawful possession of a firearm. She was sentenced to 6 years in prison, a sentence that many supporters felt was still too harsh, while legal purists felt it was too lenient. Marianne served roughly 3 years of her sentence before being released on parole. She emerged from prison to a life that was forever changed, moved to different countries to escape the constant glare of the spotlight, and eventually returned to Germany in her later years. She passed away in 1996 at the age of 46 after a battle with cancer, and per her final wishes, she was buried next to her daughter, Anna. Her case remains one of the most famous examples of vigilante justice in modern history, frequently cited in discussions about the psychological limits of a grieving parent. Marianne Bachmeier never expressed regret for her actions, maintaining until her final breath that her only goal was to protect her daughter's dignity from the man who had stolen her future.
The DC sniper John Muhammad came to fully understand what that term truly means.
The execution of John Allen Muhammad has been carried out under the laws of the Commonwealth.
John Allen Muhammad was a former Gulf War veteran and marksman who had become deeply radicalized by a bitter custody battle and a fractured sense of identity. By 2002, he had recruited 17-year-old Lee Boyd Malvo, serving as a surrogate father figure while training the teenager in urban warfare and precision shooting. Muhammad's motive was not random. It was a calculated, multi-phase plan of domestic terrorism, fueled by a desire for revenge against his ex-wife and the American government. He intended to create a wave of panic that would mask his ultimate goal of kidnapping his children and killing his ex-wife. To achieve this, he modified a 1990 Chevrolet Caprice into a mobile sniper's nest, cutting a small hole in the trunk near the license plate to allow for a hidden firing position. He taught Malvo to shoot from the dark confines of the vehicle, transforming the car into a ghost that could strike and vanish before police could even secure a perimeter. Muhammad viewed himself as a general in a private war, meticulously mapping out gas stations, parking lots, and schools in the Washington, D.C. area that offered easy access to major highways for a quick escape.
On October 2, 2002, the Beltway sniper attacks began, plunging the Maryland, Virginia, and D.C. area into a state of absolute paralysis. Over the course of 23 days, John Allen Muhammad and Lee Boyd Malvo systematically picked off innocent people engaged in the most mundane daily activities. They targeted individuals pumping gas, mowing lawns, or simply walking to their cars. Each shot was a single high-velocity round fired from a distance, leaving no shell casings and no witnesses who could identify the source. The randomness of the killings created a psychological vacuum of fear. Schools went into lockdown, outdoor events were canceled, and people began zigzagging across parking lots to avoid becoming a target. Muhammad reveled in the chaos, watching the news coverage of the frantic police response from afar. He began leaving taunting notes for the authorities at crime scenes, including a tarot death card with the inscription, "Call me God." He was no longer just a disgruntled veteran. He was a phantom executioner who had successfully brought the capital of the United States to its knees, proving that 2 men in an old car could hold an entire region hostage. The investigation, led by Chief Charles Moose, was initially hampered by a false lead regarding a white box truck, but John Allen Muhammad's own arrogance eventually led to his downfall. During a series of taunting phone calls to the police, the snipers bragged about an unsolved murder in Montgomery, Alabama, involving a liquor store robbery. When investigators checked the Alabama files, They found a fingerprint on a magazine at the scene that belonged to Lee Boyd Malvo. This single piece of evidence broke the case wide open, linking Malvo to Muhammad and his Chevrolet Caprice. The FBI and local police quickly realized they weren't looking for a white truck, but a dark blue sedan. A nationwide lookout was issued, and the vehicle was added to the National Crime Database. Muhammad, unaware that the net was closing in, continued to move through the area, stopping at a rest area in Frederick County, Maryland. His belief in his own tactical superiority had made him careless. He stayed in a public place with the very vehicle that had been identified by law enforcement, resting in the same trunk he had used. In the early morning hours of October 24, 2002, a truck driver spotted the blue Caprice at a rest stop on Interstate 70 and called the authorities. Within minutes, tactical teams surrounded the vehicle, moving with silent precision through the dark. They found John Allen Muhammad and Lee Boyd Malvo asleep inside. The arrest was made without a single shot being fired. As the trunk was searched, the full horror of Muhammad's ingenuity was revealed. Police found the Bushmaster XM15 rifle, a bipod, a silencer, and the specialized sniper hole cut into the steel. They also recovered maps, a global positioning system, and notes detailing future targets. The god who had terrorized the Beltway was taken into custody in his underwear, looking disheveled and ordinary. The arrest sent a wave of relief through the nation. But for the families of the 10 people killed and 3 wounded, the nightmare was shifting from the streets to the courtroom. Muhammad remained stoic and unrepentant, his cold demeanor during his initial processing reflecting the same lack of empathy he had shown his victims during his 3-week campaign of blood. The legal proceedings against John Allen Muhammad were as intense as the manhunt itself. Because the crimes crossed state lines and involved multiple jurisdictions, he faced trials in both Virginia and Maryland. In 2003, a Virginia jury convicted him of capital murder, with the prosecution successfully arguing that the killings were part of a terroristic plot to extort the government and settle personal scores. Throughout the trial, Muhammad acted as his own attorney for a time, displaying a bizarre and detached arrogance that alienated the jury. He was sentenced to death, while Malvo, due to his age at the time of the crimes, received multiple life sentences. On November 10, 2009, 7 years after his rampage began, John Allen Muhammad was executed by lethal injection at the Greensville Correctional Center in Virginia. He refused to make a final statement, maintaining his silence until the very end. His legacy remains one of the most terrifying examples of how military training can be twisted by personal grievance into a weapon of mass tragedy. He is remembered not as a soldier, but as a cowardly sniper who chose the most vulnerable targets to satisfy a deluded sense of power.
On a local TV breakfast show in Virginia, a live report from a shopping centre.
We're seeing tourism. We want the people that come here to say that.
We're not going to show the horrific 6 seconds which followed.
Vester Flanagan was a man who moved through the broadcast news industry, leaving a trail of conflict behind him. In 2012, he was hired as a reporter for WDBJ-7 in Roanoke, Virginia. However, his tenure was marked by volatile behavior and claims of racial discrimination that his co-workers vehemently denied. Management found him difficult to work with, citing his aggressive outbursts and inability to take direction. By February 2013, the station had seen enough. He was fired. The termination was so contentious that police had to be called to escort him from the building. For the next 2 years, Flanagan lived in a small apartment, marinating in his bitterness. He filed a lawsuit against the station, which was eventually dismissed, further fueling his belief that he was a victim of a grand conspiracy. He began meticulously planning a final performance that would force the world to see his face and hear his grievances, targeting the very people who had replaced him in the spotlight. In the weeks leading up to August 2015, Flanagan's preparation shifted from mental fantasy to tactical reality. He purchased a Glock 19 handgun and practiced his aim. More importantly, he prepared his digital footprint. He created social media accounts under his professional alias, Bryce Williams, intended to serve as a platform for his manifesto. He wrote a 23-page document, which he later faxed to ABC News, citing the Charleston church shooting as his tipping point and claiming he was a human powder keg ready to explode. He detailed his grievances against his former employer and expressed admiration for other mass shooters. Flanagan wasn't just planning a murder, he was planning a broadcast. He bought a GoPro camera and a chest mount, intending to film the killings from a first-person perspective, ensuring that his revenge would be archived forever on the internet. He was determined to turn his professional failure into a viral, horrific success. On the morning of August 26, 2015, a WDBJ-7 news crew was conducting a live interview at Bridgewater Plaza. Reporter Allison Parker and photojournalist Adam Ward were smiling, filming a segment about local tourism. They had no idea that Flanagan was standing just feet away in the shadows, filming them with his own camera. He waited for the exact moment they went live to thousands of viewers. As Allison interviewed her guest, Flanagan stepped forward, leveled his handgun, and opened fire. The live news camera captured the terrifying screams and the sight of the camera falling to the ground as Adam Ward was struck. Back at the station, the anchors watched in stunned silence.
Okay, not sure what happened there. We will.
As the feed cut away. Moments later, Flanagan uploaded his own first-person footage to Twitter and Facebook, showing the cold, calculated execution from his point of view. In a matter of minutes, the live stream shooting had bypassed news filters and hit the global consciousness directly.
It is my very, very sad duty to report that we have determined, through the help of the police and our own employees, that Allison and Adam died.
Immediately following the shooting, Flanagan fled the scene in a gray Ford Mustang. The Virginia State Police launched a massive manhunt using cell tower pings and license plate readers to track his movement. As he sped down Interstate 66, Flanagan continued to interact with the world via his social media accounts, posting justifications for his actions and accusing the victims of making racial slurs against him in the past. The police finally spotted his vehicle, and a high-speed chase ensued. Realizing that he was surrounded and there was no escape, Flanagan steered his car off the road. When officers approached the vehicle, they heard a single gunshot. Inside, they found Flanagan with a self-inflicted head wound. He was airlifted to a nearby hospital in critical condition. But the man who wanted the world to watch him die on his own terms finally succumbed to his injuries. The chase ended, but the digital trauma he unleashed was only beginning to spread. The deaths of Allison Parker and Adam Ward left the community of Roanoke and the journalism world in deep mourning. The case sparked intense debates regarding gun control, workplace safety, and the ethics of social media platforms in hosting violent content. For weeks, the first-person video Flanagan filmed haunted the internet, as platforms struggled to delete it as fast as it was being re-uploaded. It was a landmark case that proved how a revenge killer could hijack the modern media landscape to amplify their message. Allison's father, Andy Parker, became a prominent advocate for stricter gun laws and better digital regulations, turning his grief into a mission to prevent such tragedies. Vester Flanagan's name became synonymous with the disgruntled employee archetype taken to its most extreme and terrifying conclusion. His legacy is not one of a victimized reporter, but of a calculated murderer who used technology to force a horrified public to witness his final, desperate act of cowardice. In the quiet suburbs of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, 1984, the Plauché family lived a life of normalcy until the unthinkable shattered their peace. Gary Plauché, a dedicated father and equipment manager, trusted Jeff Doucette, a local karate instructor who had become a close family friend. Doucette wasn't just a teacher, he was a mentor to Gary's 11-year-old son, Jody. However, behind the mask of mentorship lay a predatory monster. On a Tuesday morning, Doucette kidnapped Jody, spiraling the family into a living hell. For over a week, Gary and his wife lived in a vacuum of silence and terror, not knowing if their son was alive or dead. The FBI eventually tracked them to a motel in California. Jody was rescued, but the damage was profound. As the boy returned home, he began to recount the horrific details of the abuse he suffered at the hands of the man they had trusted. Gary listened, and as each word fell from his son's lips, a part of him died, replaced by a cold, unwavering resolve. The legal system was moving, but for Gary, the scales of justice felt broken. He didn't just see a criminal, he saw a parasite that had consumed his son's innocence. The rage wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a quiet, darkening storm. Gary began to realize that the man who stole his son's childhood would soon be walking back onto Louisiana soil. He decided then that the monster would never reach a courtroom.
Preparation became Gary's only focus. He knew the schedule of the prisoner transport. Jeff Doucette was being flown from California back to Baton Rouge to face kidnapping and sexual assault charges. Gary understood the layout of the Baton Rouge Metropolitan Airport perfectly. He didn't want a chase. He wanted an execution. He donned a disguise, a baseball cap and sunglasses, and blended into the crowd near the arrival terminal. In his pocket sat a .38 caliber revolver, heavy with the weight of his decision. He stood near a row of payphones, pretending to be just another traveler waiting for a loved one. His eyes, however, remained fixed on the security doors where the police escort would emerge. The air in the terminal felt thick, almost unbreathable. Every minute felt like an hour. Gary wasn't trembling. He was remarkably calm, fueled by a singular, paternal mission. He watched the news crews setting up their cameras nearby. They were there to capture the high-profile return of a kidnapper. But they had no idea they were about to film a moment of history. Gary checked his watch. The plane had landed. The sound of footsteps echoing in the hallway grew louder. The detectives appeared first, their faces stern and professional. Then, there he was, Jeff Doucette, handcuffed and smug, walking with a stride that suggested he expected to beat the system. Gary felt the cold steel of the revolver against his palm. The world around him blurred, until there was only one target left in his vision.
The moment arrived with a chilling precision. As Doucette was led past the payphones, only feet away from the local news cameras, Gary stepped out from the shadows. He didn't scream or hesitate. He moved with the practiced grace of a hunter. Just as Doucette turned his head to look toward the cameras, Gary leveled the revolver inches from the side of the kidnapper's head. "Why, Gary? Why?" Doucette's eyes widened for a split second of pure realization. Crack! A single shot rang out, echoing through the tiled halls of the airport like a thunderclap. The bullet entered behind Doucette's ear, killing him almost instantly. The kidnapper crumpled to the floor like a puppet with its strings cut. Pandemonium erupted. Travelers screamed and dove for cover, while police officers drew their weapons, shouting for everyone to get down. Gary, however, did not run. He didn't try to hide the gun. He simply stood there, his arm dropping to his side, watching the life drain out of the man who had hurt his boy. A detective tackled Gary to the ground, pinning him against the cold floor. The cameras, which were already rolling, captured the entire event in high definition. The footage was raw, brutal, and undeniably final. As the handcuffs clicked around Gary's wrists, he looked at the officers with a face of total peace. He had done what he felt the law could never truly do. The monster was dead, and the father was ready to face the consequences. The video of the shooting was broadcast across the nation that evening, sparking an unprecedented debate about justice and vigilantism. To the legal system, Gary Plauché was a murderer who had committed a cold-blooded assassination in a public place. To the public, however, he was a hero, the personification of every parent's darkest desire for retribution. As Gary sat in his jail cell, thousands of letters of support began to pour in from across the globe. People offered to pay his legal fees. Mothers cried for his release. Fathers stood in solidarity with his actions. The prosecution faced a massive dilemma. How do you convict a man when the entire jury pool believes he did the right thing? The media circus outside the courthouse was unlike anything Baton Rouge had ever seen. Jody, now safe but scarred, became the center of the emotional narrative. The defense argued that Gary was suffering from a temporary break in sanity brought on by the trauma of his son's kidnapping. They painted a picture of a father pushed beyond the limits of human endurance. Experts testified about the psychological impact of learning your child has been violated. The trial wasn't just about a shooting. It was a trial of the American heart. Every time the footage was played in court, the room went silent. You could see the back of Gary's head, the flash of the muzzle, and the fall of the predator. Gary remained humble, never gloating, only stating that he couldn't let that man live to hurt anyone else.